My name is Arthur Miller, and I'm 72 years old. After my wife Margaret passed away in March 2024, I thought I could still count on family. I trusted my grandson Jason, whom I'd practically raised as my own son after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, to give me the support I needed during these final years. My life had been dedicated to caring for my family. Now it was reduced to tending my small garden behind our house in suburban Parma, Ohio, reading old paperbacks, and dealing with the quiet loneliness that comes with age. I saw Jason as the future of our family name, the one who would carry on our legacy. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. What I didn't realize was that Jason saw something entirely different when he looked at me. To him, I wasn't his beloved grandfather. I was an obstacle standing between him and a $1.5 million life insurance policy that would only be released upon my death. My life had become nothing more than a financial asset to him, and I was a burden that needed to be removed. I'm a man of peace, always have been. Throughout my 41 years working as a maintenance supervisor at Ford's Cleveland engine plant in Brook Park, from 1971 until my retirement in 2012 when the plant closed, I learned that patience and quiet observation often reveal more than loud confrontations. My calm demeanor would soon be mistaken for weakness, but I possessed something Jason never anticipated, a survival instinct sharpened by decades of life experience. The signs had been there for months, though I'd chosen to ignore them. Jason's visits became more frequent after Margaret's funeral, but his questions grew increasingly focused on my finances. "Grandpa, where do you keep your important papers?" he'd ask. "When exactly does that life insurance policy mature?" The way he studied my medicine bottles and asked about my doctor appointments should have set off alarms. My health wasn't perfect. At 72, I dealt with type 2 diabetes and mild hypertension, conditions that required daily medication but weren't immediately life-threatening with proper management. Jason knew about these conditions intimately, having driven me to doctor appointments at the Cleveland Clinic several times. In his twisted mind, he saw an opportunity. The betrayal came on a cold Tuesday evening in late April 2024. I was in my basement workshop organizing tools I'd collected over the years when I heard Jason's footsteps on the stairs. "Hey, Grandpa, can you help me find that old radio down there?" he called out. When I turned around, his expression had changed completely. The mask of loving concern had slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You know, Grandpa," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I've been thinking about that insurance policy of yours." Before I could respond, he shoved me hard against the workbench. My 72-year-old frame couldn't handle the sudden force, and I stumbled backward. Jason quickly moved to the basement door, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a metallic click that echoed through the concrete walls. "Jason," I called out, my voice cracking. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," he replied from the other side of the door. "Your diabetes, your blood pressure. Everyone knows how fragile you are. In a few days when they find you down there, it'll just look like a tragic accident, an old man who got confused and locked himself in his own basement." I heard Jason's 2019 Honda Civic pull out of the driveway, and the silence that followed was deafening. He'd taken my iPhone 12, naturally. The landline upstairs might as well have been on Mars. But Jason had made one crucial miscalculation in his murder plan. He'd underestimated the resourcefulness that comes with age and experience. The basement was cold, probably around 55 degrees, and I knew that hypothermia could set in within hours in my condition. My metformin and lisinopril were upstairs in the kitchen, and without them, my blood sugar would spike dangerously within 12 to 18 hours. Jason was counting on my medical conditions to do his dirty work for him. But I hadn't survived 7 decades by giving up easily. In the corner of my workshop sat an old Kenwood TS520 ham radio that I'd restored in 2019 after Margaret complained about my electronic junk cluttering the house. It was a relic from the 1970s, something Jason would have dismissed as worthless antique equipment. The antenna wire ran up through a small gap in the basement window frame, completely invisible unless you knew where to look. With trembling fingers, I powered up the radio. The familiar amber glow of the vacuum tubes filled the darkness, and for the first time since Jason had locked me in, I felt a spark of hope. I tuned to 14,300 MHz on the 20-meter band, where I knew the local emergency net operated on Tuesday evenings. CQ, this is KC8DXM calling CQ emergency, I transmitted in a weak voice, using my amateur radio call sign that I'd held for over 30 years. Within minutes, I heard a response. KC8DXM, this is W8GHD, go ahead with your emergency. The voice belonged to Harold Henderson, my next-door neighbor of 15 years. Harold was a retired Cleveland police sergeant, 68 years old, who lived alone since his wife died of cancer 3 years ago. We'd often talked on the radio during evening nets, discussing everything from antenna theory to retirement challenges. Harold, this is Arthur Miller, I whispered into the microphone. I'm trapped in my basement. My grandson Jason locked me in here and took my phone. I need help, but be careful, he's dangerous. There was a pause before Harold responded. Arthur, I copy you 5 by 9. I'm calling 911 right now. Stay on frequency. 28 minutes later, I heard Harold's voice through the basement wall. Arthur, can you hear me? The paramedics are here. The Parma Fire Department rescue team broke down the basement door with a Halligan bar. As they helped me up the stairs, my legs barely able to support my weight, I saw Harold talking quietly to a Parma police officer in my driveway. The cop was taking notes in a small black pad. Sir, we need to get you to Metro Health Medical Center for evaluation, the lead paramedic said. He was a competent young man, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a name tag reading Martinez. Your blood sugar is 342, and your core temperature is down to 94. 2 degrees. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught Harold's eye. Harold, I said quietly, can you do me a favor? Don't mention the radio to anyone just yet. Tell the police I managed to pound on the water pipes until neighbors heard me. Harold nodded slowly. After 30 years on the force, he understood the value of keeping certain information close to the vest until the right moment. At Metro Health, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, an experienced emergency physician in her mid-40s, stabilized my blood sugar with an insulin drip and warmed me up with heated blankets. She didn't waste time with small talk. Mr. Miller, you're lucky to be alive, she said bluntly, reviewing my chart. Another 4 to 6 hours and we'd be talking about organ failure. Your kidneys were already starting to show stress. While I recovered over the next 18 hours, my mind was working overtime. Jason would return home eventually, probably expecting to find my body. Instead, he'd discover police tape across the basement door and neighbors who'd start asking uncomfortable questions. His perfect murder plan was already falling apart, but I needed more than just survival. I needed justice. On my second day in the hospital, Jason finally showed up. He walked into my room at 2:30 p.m., wearing his best concerned grandson expression, carrying a small bouquet of roses from the hospital gift shop that probably cost him $12. Grandpa, thank God you're okay, he said loudly enough for the nurses to hear through the open door. I was so worried when I couldn't reach you on your phone. I looked at Jason standing there with his fake flowers and rehearsed concern, and something cold settled in my chest. This was my moment. Jason, I said weakly, motioning him closer to my hospital bed. I'm so confused about what happened. Can you help me understand? He pulled the visitor's chair closer and leaned in, lowering his voice. Grandpa, you must have gotten disoriented and locked yourself in the basement somehow. You know how these things can happen at your age. My memory was fine, and we both knew it. But I played along. The police officer asked me some strange questions, I continued. Something about whether anyone else had access to the house. I told him no, of course, just family. Jason's relief was visible in the way his shoulders relaxed. He thought I was covering for him, protecting the family name. That's right, Grandpa. Just a terrible accident. These things happen with elderly people more often than you'd think. What Jason didn't know was that I'd spent my first night in the hospital setting up something he'd never expect. Harold had smuggled in a small digital voice recorder, a Sony ICD PX470, that his tech-savvy daughter had given him for Christmas 2023 for recording family stories. It was no bigger than a smartphone and virtually silent when recording. I had carefully taped it under the hospital bed's side rail, positioned perfectly to catch our conversation. "Jason," I said, my voice trembling with what he thought was confusion, but was actually controlled rage. "I keep having these strange memories about you being in the basement with me, but that can't be right, can it? You weren't even at the house that day." His eyes narrowed slightly, but the arrogance took over. "Grandpa, I was there, remember? I came to check on you around 9 o'clock because you hadn't answered your phone calls all day. When I couldn't find you upstairs, I got worried and started looking around the house. I heard you calling from the basement, but when I tried the door, it was somehow jammed from the inside." Perfect. He was rewriting history in real time, but his new version still placed him at the scene with specific timing. I pressed further. "The doctor said I could have died down there. My blood sugar, the cold. If someone wanted to hurt an old man, that would be the perfect way to do it without getting their hands dirty." Jason's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something calculating flash in his eyes. "Well, hypothetically speaking, yes. Someone with diabetes and high blood pressure. The stress alone could trigger a cardiac event or diabetic coma. But who would do such a terrible thing to their own grandfather?" "Someone who knew about my life insurance policy," I whispered, watching his reaction carefully. That's when Jason made his fatal mistake. Instead of deflecting or showing genuine confusion, he leaned in closer and said, "Grandpa, let's be realistic here. You're 72 years old with serious health problems that are only going to get worse. That $1.5 million would be put to much better use helping someone who has their whole life ahead of them. Someone who could invest it, make it grow, create something meaningful with it." The recorder caught every word. "You mean someone like you?" I asked quietly. "Well, yes," he said, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "I'm your only family left, aren't I? And when you're gone, naturally, of course, that money would come to me anyway. Maybe this whole basement thing was just God's way of speeding up what was already inevitable. At your age, with your health issues, how much quality time do you really have left?" I had him. Not only had he confessed to attempted murder, but he'd also revealed his motive with crystal clarity and shown a complete lack of remorse. The recording would be devastating in court. Over the next 2 days, while Jason made a show of being the devoted grandson to the hospital staff, I worked with Harold to build an ironclad case. Harold's police contacts ran a comprehensive background check that revealed Jason's massive gambling debts, over $92,000 owed to various online sports betting platforms, poker sites, and most dangerously, $18,000 to a loan shark in Akron who had already made threatening phone calls. His credit cards were maxed out at their $30,000 combined limit, and he'd been fired from his job at a Progressive insurance call center 9 months earlier for missing too many days due to his gambling addiction. The insurance policy wasn't just attractive to him. It was literally his only way out of complete financial ruin and potential physical danger from his creditors. Harold also discovered that Jason had been researching my medical conditions online extensively. The browser history on his laptop, which police seized with a warrant based on my statement, showed searches dating back 3 months for diabetes emergency symptoms, how cold temperature affects elderly, hypothermia death timeline, and most damning of all, accidental death versus murder investigation procedures, and Slayer Rule Life Insurance Ohio. But the final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, the 78-year-old widow who lived across the street and suffered from insomnia, had been watching through her front window on the night Jason locked me in the basement. She'd seen him leave the house at exactly 9:52 p.m., sit in his Honda Civic for several minutes while repeatedly checking his phone, then drive away quickly with his headlights off until he reached the end of the block. Her testimony would establish clear premeditation and consciousness of guilt. On my 4th day in the hospital, Detective Maria Santos from Parma Police visited me. She was a no-nonsense investigator in her late 40s who specialized in elder abuse and financial crimes against seniors. "Mr. Miller," she said, settling into the bedside chair and opening a thick file folder, "we've reviewed all the evidence and I think you know what we found." I carefully retrieved the digital recorder from its hiding place and handed it to her. "Detective, I think you'll find this particularly interesting. My grandson thought he was talking to a confused old man. Instead, he was confessing to attempted murder." She listened to the entire conversation through earphones, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When Jason's voice described the insurance money being better used by someone with their whole life ahead of them, and his suggestion that my near death was God's way of speeding up what was already inevitable, she physically grimaced in disgust. "Mr. Miller, in 22 years of investigating crimes against seniors, this is one of the most callous attempted murders I've encountered," she said, removing the earphones. "Your grandson showed sophisticated planning, clear financial motive, and absolutely zero remorse. We have enough evidence to charge him with attempted murder in the 1st degree, elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. We'll be arresting him tomorrow morning." Jason was arrested at his cramped apartment on Ridge Road in Parma at 7:45 a.m. on a Friday in early May 2024. According to Harold, who heard it from his police contacts, Jason answered the door in his bathrobe, clearly having just woken up from what the arresting officers described as an apparent 3-day drinking bender based on the empty bottles visible throughout his apartment. When Detective Santos read him his charges, attempted murder in the 1st degree, elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, Jason's first words were, "This is completely insane. He's just a confused old man with dementia who doesn't know what he's talking about." That arrogance and his dismissive attitude toward my mental capacity would prove to be devastating mistakes in court. The trial began 8 months later in November 2024 at the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas in downtown Cleveland. Jason had managed to hire Michael Davidson, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in creating reasonable doubt through character assassination. His strategy was predictable but dangerous. Paint me as a mentally declining old man suffering from grief-induced paranoia who had fabricated the entire story to get attention after my wife's death. But Davidson hadn't counted on the methodical way Harold and I had documented everything, or the damning physical evidence. The prosecution was led by Lisa Chen, an experienced prosecutor known for her meticulous preparation and devastating cross-examinations. When she played the recorded conversation for the jury on the 2nd day of trial, the courtroom fell absolutely silent. Jason's voice, clear and unmistakable, describing how someone with my medical conditions could be killed without getting their hands dirty, sent visible shivers through the 12 jurors. When his recorded voice suggested that my potential death would be God's way of speeding up what was already inevitable, I watched 3 jurors physically recoil in disgust, and one elderly female juror actually gasped audibly. Jason's face went white as paper. He leaned over to whisper urgently to Davidson, probably realizing for the first time that his own words would convict him beyond any possibility of reasonable doubt. Mrs. Patterson's testimony was devastating. At 78 years old, she walked slowly to the witness stand with a metal cane, but her memory was sharp as a razor, and her testimony unshakable. "I saw that young man leave Arthur's house at exactly 9:52 p.m., she said, pointing directly at Jason with a steady finger. He sat in his car for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, kept looking at his phone like he was timing something. Then he drove off fast with his headlights off until he got to the end of the block. I thought it was strange enough that I wrote it down in my diary that night." The prosecution's computer forensics expert, a FBI-trained specialist, testified about Jason's internet searches with devastating precision. The jury visibly cringed when they heard about his research into diabetes emergency symptoms and hypothermia death timeline elderly. When the expert revealed Jason's searches about the Slayer Rule life insurance, indicating he knew that murdering me would void his inheritance. One juror, a middle-aged woman who reminded me of Margaret, shook her head in visible disgust and looked directly at Jason with contempt. Harold Henderson's testimony carried enormous weight due to his impeccable credentials. As a retired police sergeant with 30 years of experience and 17 commendations for outstanding service, his credibility was unshakable. He described finding me in that basement in clinical detail. My core temperature dangerously low at 94.2 degrees, my blood sugar at life-threatening levels of 342, my obvious dehydration and confusion. In 3 decades of police work, Harold told the jury, I've seen a lot of crime scenes and a lot of desperate people. But I've never seen anyone try to murder their own grandfather for insurance money, using such a calculated, cold-blooded method. This was premeditated murder, plain and simple. The prosecution's medical expert, Dr. Rebecca Foster from the Cleveland Clinic, explained to the jury exactly how close I had come to death. Mr. Miller was in the early stages of diabetic ketoacidosis when he was rescued, she testified. Combined with moderate hypothermia and dehydration, he was perhaps 4 to 6 hours away from organ failure and death. The defendant clearly researched these conditions extensively and knew exactly what would happen if his grandfather was trapped without medication and warmth. Jason's defense crumbled completely when Davidson made the mistake of putting him on the stand. Under cross-examination, Prosecutor Chen methodically destroyed him over the course of 2 hours. Mr. Miller, you testified that you were deeply concerned about your grandfather's welfare, correct? Yes, that's absolutely right. Yet phone records show you didn't call him once during the 4 days he was missing. Didn't call police, didn't call hospitals, didn't call any family friends or neighbors. Does that sound like deep concern to you? Jason stammered through an answer about being overwhelmed with work responsibilities, conveniently forgetting that he'd been unemployed for 9 months. Chen continued relentlessly. You also testified that the basement door was jammed from the inside when you arrived to check on your grandfather. But mechanical inspection shows the door and lock mechanism work perfectly. There are no signs of malfunction, no scratches or damage suggesting jamming. The deadbolt can only be locked or unlocked manually. How do you explain that discrepancy? I don't know. Maybe it got unjammed when the firefighters broke it down with their tools. The prosecutor smiled coldly. Mr. Miller, deadbolts don't spontaneously jam and unjam themselves. Someone deliberately locked your grandfather in that basement and left him to die. If it wasn't you, who was it? Who else had access to the house? Who else knew about the insurance policy? Who else owed $92,000 in gambling debts? Jason had no answer that made any sense. His stammering, evasive responses only convinced the jury of his guilt. The final blow came when Chen played the recording again, this time with Jason forced to listen to his own voice describing my potential death as God speeding up what was already inevitable. Mr. Miller, do those sound like the words of a loving, concerned grandson, or the words of someone who viewed his grandfather as an obstacle to be removed? Jason couldn't answer. The jury deliberated for exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Williams, known for her tough sentences in elder abuse cases, sentenced Jason to 25 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 21 years. Mr. Miller, she said, looking directly at my grandson with unconcealed contempt, your crimes represent a fundamental betrayal of the most sacred human bonds. You attempted to murder the man who raised you, loved you, and trusted you, all for financial gain. You showed no remorse, no recognition of the magnitude of your betrayal. This court finds your actions not just criminal, but morally reprehensible in the extreme. The sentence of this court is designed not just to punish you, but to send a clear message that elder abuse will be met with the full force of the law. As the bailiffs led Jason away in shackles in December 2024, he turned to look at me one last time. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in his eyes before, genuine terror about spending the next 2 decades in prison. Grandpa, he called out, his voice cracking with what sounded like real emotion for the first time. "I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Please, please forgive me." But it was far too late for apologies. The damage was irreversible. Within a week of the trial's conclusion, I contacted my attorney to completely rewrite my will. Jason's name was removed entirely, along with a detailed explanation of his crimes that would become part of the permanent legal record. Due to Ohio's Slayer rule, Jason was automatically disqualified from receiving any benefit from my death anyway. But I wanted to make my intentions crystal clear. The $1.5 million life insurance policy would now benefit the Cleveland Area Agency on Aging, specifically their elder abuse prevention and education programs. I sold the house on Elmwood Avenue in Parma in early 2025. Too many dark memories lingered in that basement workshop. With the proceeds, I moved into Sunrise Senior Living in Westlake, a well-regarded community where I'm treated with dignity and genuine respect. The residents here know my story, and they treat me not as a victim, but as someone who fought back against evil and emerged victorious. The best part of my new life? I've started teaching amateur radio classes to other residents who want to learn emergency communication skills. We have 12 students now, ranging in age from 68 to 84. Last month, we established regular contact with a group of seniors in Sarasota, Florida, who are also interested in emergency preparedness. It turns out that old skills and knowledge never really become obsolete. They just become more valuable with time. Jason is currently serving his sentence at the Grafton Correctional Institution, about an hour south of Cleveland. According to the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction website, his earliest possible parole date is January 15, 2045. He'll be 46 years old if he gets out then, assuming he serves the minimum 21 years. I'll be 93 if I'm still alive. Somehow I think I'll outlive his entire sentence just out of pure spite. This experience taught me several important lessons. Personal dignity is worth infinitely more than any amount of money. Family bonds can be more fragile than we imagine, and the best revenge isn't violence or hatred. It's justice served methodically, completely, and without any possibility of appeal. Jason's greed didn't just cost him his freedom for the next 2 decades. It cost him his family, his future, his reputation, and any realistic chance of redemption. The insurance company, by the way, was required to honor the policy despite the attempted murder, since I survived and Jason was convicted. When I eventually pass away from natural causes, the Cleveland Area Agency on Aging will receive the full benefit to fund programs that protect other seniors from financial abuse. As for me, I sleep peacefully every night in my comfortable apartment, knowing that evil actions inevitably have severe consequences, and that even at 72 years old, a man can still defend his honor and his life using intelligence, patience, and careful planning. I've learned that sometimes the most effective weapon against betrayal isn't strength or violence. It's simply being smart enough to let evil people destroy themselves with their own words and actions. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.